Now, welcome to this, our fourth and final week of the series, Renewal, based on the book of Ruth. Week 1, we met Ruth, the Moabite woman, as she is widowed from an Israelite man in her homeland of Moab. She and her Moabite sister-in-law Orpah and her Israelite mother-in-law Naomi have all been widowed. So Naomi heads back to Bethlehem where her family is. Ruth opts to follow her, thus becoming a foreigner in a new land. It's a big risk, but Ruth loves her mother-in-law Naomi. They get to Bethlehem, broke and hungry, and Naomi is more than a little bitter. Now, surely Ruth wondered what she had gotten herself into. And it doesn't get any easier from there. She is sent out to glean, which is back-breaking work. But she has a stroke of luck, or providence. She's gleaning in the field of Boaz, a kinsman to her deceased husband, and he shares generously with her. She goes to him in the night, risking shame, and makes herself vulnerable to his rejection. And in the morning, he tells her that he is not the one who can redeem her life. He is a kinsman, but not the closest kin. There's another man who has first dibs on her and all other property of her husband's family, because that is how women were perceived at this time, as property. So that's where we find Ruth at the opening of chapter 4. Nothing seems to be going right. She's done everything asked of her. She's loved her husband and her mother-in-law well. She's worked hard. She's been humble. She went to Boaz, as Naomi has told her, and still life is not going her way. Have you had those days? Or weeks? Months? Years? Let's look at chapter 4. Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the gate and sat down there. Just then, the Redeemer about whom Boaz had spoken was passing by. He said, "Sir, come over here and sit down." So he turned aside and sat down. Then he took 10 men from the town's elders and said, "Sit down here." And they sat down. Boaz said to the Redeemer, "Naomi, who has returned from the field of Moab, is selling the portion of the field that belonged to our brother Elimelech. And I thought that I should let you know and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you won't redeem it, tell me so that I may know. There isn't anyone to redeem it except you, and I'm the next in line after you." And he replied, "I will redeem it." Then Boaz said, "On the day when you buy the field from Naomi, you also buy Ruth, the Moabite, the wife of the dead man, in order to preserve the dead man's name for his inheritance." But the Redeemer replied, "Then I can't redeem it for myself without risking damage to my own inheritance. Redeem it for yourself. You can have my right of redemption because I am unable to act as Redeemer." Now in Israel in former times, this was the practice regarding redemption and exchange to confirm any such matter. A man would take off his sandal and give it to the other person. This was the process of making a transaction binding in Israel. Then the Redeemer said to Boaz, "Buy it for yourself," and he took off his sandal. Boaz announced to the elders and all the people, "Today you are witnesses that I've bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and all that belonged to Mahlon, and also Ruth the Moabite, the wife of Mahlon, I've bought to be my wife, to preserve the dead man's name for his inheritance, so that the name of the dead man might not be cut off from his brothers or from the gate of his hometown. Today you are witnesses." Then all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord grant that the woman who is coming into your household be like Rachel and like Leah, both of whom built up the house of Israel. May you be fertile in Ephrathah, and may you preserve a name in Bethlehem, and may your household be like the household of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, through the children that the Lord will give you from this young woman." So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. He was intimate with her, and the Lord let her become pregnant, and she gave birth to a son. The women said to Naomi, "May the Lord be blessed, who today hasn't left you without a redeemer. May his name be proclaimed in Israel. He will restore your life and sustain you in your old age. Your daughter-in-law, who loves you, has given birth to him. She's better for you than 7 sons." Naomi took the child and held him to her breast, and she became his guardian. The neighborhood women gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." They called him Obed. He became Jesse's father and David's grandfather. These are the generations of Perez. Perez became the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Amminadab, Amminadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, Boaz the father of Obed, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David. Ruth faces rejection at the opening of this chapter. This unnamed kinsman is willing to take the land, but not willing to take Ruth. Doesn't tell us why, and I hesitate to make him a bad guy. After all, if he was a faithful man, his scriptures have plenty to warn him against marrying a foreign wife. Ezra 9:12 says, "So now do not give your daughters to their sons, nor take their daughters for your sons." Well, that's a scripture that Naomi ignored when she married her sons to Orpah and Ruth. Deuteronomy 7:3-4 reads, "Don't intermarry with them. Don't give your daughter to one of their sons to marry, and don't take one of their daughters to marry your son, because they will turn your child away from following me so that they end up serving other gods. That will make the Lord's anger burn against you, and he will quickly annihilate you." Now, I'm just guessing, but I don't think annihilation was on this man's bucket list. So he says no to the whole inheritance. Now, if this unnamed man's descendants were the one who wrote this story, I suspect that he would be the hero of the tale. It would sound something like this. A man walked up to Grandpa at the city gates and offered him acres and acres of land, and he said, "Yes." And then this tempter said, "You must also take a foreign wife." But Grandpa would not be swayed to forsake the commands of God. He would not forsake God's law for wealth or for riches. But alas, it is not his family's version of the story that is handed down to us. It's Ruth's family who tells this story. And we know that that's important because the last lines of this chapter are spent naming Obed's lineage, so they wouldn't do that if that wasn't important to the story. Obed, Ruth's son, is the product of a forbidden marriage. King David, the most important king in Jewish history, descends from this unholy union. And by the way, Jesus the Christ is a descendant of David, a descendant of the Moabite Ruth. Ruth has had a tough life. She's widowed in her youth. She's worked hard. She's humbled herself. And then Ruth is rejected by the first Redeemer. Have you been there before? Have you ever felt like you just couldn't handle one more problem, one more rejection, one more failure? And then you got one more. Can you imagine what Ruth is thinking? She's given up everything. She's done everything she's been asked. And still, this Redeemer says, no, you're not good enough. You're not Jewish enough. You've done your very best, and still, you're not worthy. And then Boaz steps in. Pastor Bob and I were talking about this last week, and we wondered if Boaz wanted the Redeemer to say no. What do you think? If you think Boaz wanted to marry Ruth from the very beginning, raise your hand. All right. If you think he didn't want to do it, but instead he did it out of obligation or maybe respect for Ruth's sacrifices, raise your hand. I don't know. I don't know if we'll ever know the answer to that question. What we do know is that Boaz redeemed the land, and he redeemed Ruth the foreigner. No one, not even Ruth, is beyond redemption. That's some really good news right there. So just let me say that again. No one, no situation, no circumstance is beyond redemption. I was reading an interview from PBS NewsHour. Nick Schifrin was interviewing Sergeant Adam Linehan in January of 2020. They were talking about the scars that Sergeant Linehan brought home from the war in Afghanistan. Among other things, his squad lost 5 people to a suicide bomber, with lots more who were injured. Linehan was not physically wounded in the attack, but he witnessed it, and he was traumatized. And this is what he said. The way it manifested for me was, drinking. Alcoholism is a problem in my family, on my father's side of the family. And my grandfather he set the tone for that when he came back from World War II. And so I just maybe, that was just the subconscious blueprint that I had to follow. And so I drank an excessive amount. Drug abuse, right? I was like, why am I going to go get, what's the point of getting enrolled in the VA and going to a therapist and stuff? Because they're going to tell me, life is worth living. I'm like, show me the evidence. I can hear Ruth saying that. Life is worth living? Show me the evidence. 19.7 million Americans suffer from a substance use disorder. 19.7 million people. I would guess that every single one of you here knows someone who is or has been active in substance use disorder. I know it has taken years away from people that I love. Several have died way too young. A few have spent most of their adult lives incarcerated. But there is a handful who have been able to quit after a couple or a lot of rounds of rehab, after a stint in jail, after a whole lot of lost money, lost relationships, lost jobs. There are a few who are now living life to the fullest. Sergeant Adam Linehan is a writer now. He writes largely for a publication called Task and Purpose. It's for and about soldiers. He writes about the realities of war and military service. Linehan writes for people who are looking for evidence that life is worth living without being asked to deny the inhumanity that they have witnessed. He writes so that soldiers know that they are not alone. Sergeant Adam Linehan's suffering is being redeemed. No one is beyond redemption. Are you looking for redemption? Have you been redeemed? Some of us know the answer in an instant. Some have it slowly dawn on us across time. Some of us can only see our redemption in hindsight, and some are not sure yet. Are you wondering if you're redeemed? Here's a clue. Redeemed people seek to redeem. You can't contain redemption. You can only become a conduit for it. No one receiving the wonder and the goodness of redemption hides it away. No one. Like in Matthew 5:14-16, it says, "You are the light of the world. A city on top of a hill can't be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a basket. Instead, they put it on top of a lampstand, and it shines on all who are in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before people so they can see the good things you do and praise your Father who is in heaven." That's what Sergeant Linehan does when he writes. He shines. That's what folks at AA and NA and all the other 12-step programs do when they share their testimonies. They shine. And that's what Ruth does when she lays Obed into Naomi's arms. She shines. Verses 14-16 in Ruth say this. The women said to Naomi, "May the Lord be blessed, who today hasn't left you without a redeemer. May his name be proclaimed in Israel. He will restore your life and sustain you in your old age. Your daughter-in-law, who loves you, has given birth to him. She's better for you than 7 sons." Naomi took the child and held him to her breast, and she became his guardian. Ruth has been redeemed. And now Naomi is redeemed. Redeemed people redeem. We're all at very different points in this journey. Some of us are still on that downward spiral. We see the bottom coming, maybe for a second, third, or fourth time, but we know it is coming, and we know it's going to hurt a whole lot. If that is you, your story is not over. It's not over today, and it's not over when you hit that bottom. God is waiting with the promise of redemption. Redemption is for everyone and every situation. It's for you as surely as it was for Ruth when her husband died, her sister-in-law left, her beloved Naomi tried to send her away, and when the man at the gate said no thanks. Others of us have no idea where we are on this redemption journey. We are wandering through life, kind of feeling a need for renewal, but not even sure how or why. We may feel numb or tired, depressed, or disheartened. As surely as redemption would come for that bitter Mara and the foreign Ruth, redemption is coming for you too. Your story is not over. Some of us have just halted the decline, but we're resistant to the redemption. We are holding our breath in fear of what the future could be. Maybe we wonder if we are strong enough to do the back-breaking labor, or maybe we are hanging on to our pride so tightly that we can't fathom risking the shame of asking or begging for redemption like Ruth did. Your story is still being written. Redemption is within your grasp, too. And some of us are eagerly embracing the redemption that God has already worked in the messy places of our life. We've embraced the pain and the humility and the hope that is inherent in needing and asking for redemption. Some of us actively seek ways to share this redemption with others. We have been freed, and we want to be liberators for those around us. Our lamps stand proudly on top of the lampstand, and God's light shines through us, attracting all who seek the light. And we get to hand that tender, tiny seed of redemption to the next person with the promise that if it is loved and guarded, nurtured and cared for, and it may take a while, but it will be like the goodness of King David or the greatness of a Christ child born in the humble manger. Our stories are not over. Our stories are never over. Whatever suffering you are in, God can redeem. Now, let that good news pour out and bless the people all around you. Amen.